Hello, I'm Oana and you're watching TVP World Talks, where every word matters. In an intriguing plot twist in Romania, the country's President Klaus Iohannis has resigned in order to preempt a potential motion for impeachment, which was launched by the country's opposition. However, this move is only one in a series of events which have led to a major instability in the country following the annulment of recent presidential elections due to suspicion of Russian interference. Can the political crisis in Romania be resolved in a way that remains both consistent with the principles of applicable laws and which also takes into account the increasingly polarised public debate? Joining us now is Oana Popescu, Director at the Global Focus Center. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So first of all, let's talk about the practical side of things. The resignation, what does it mean for the way the country is going to operate in the run-up to the upcoming presidential elections?
Not much from an executive point of view. The president's term in office had been extended anyway, so he was in an interim role, in fact, until a rerun of the annulled elections of last year, which is scheduled for May. Now we're going to have the president of the Senate play the role of interim president, and everything will continue pretty much the same way as under the previous president.
So it's all going according to procedure, but what is not going according to procedure is the entire situation, right? Because the opposition wanted to impeach the president right before the elections. What would you say were their intentions?
Well, I think obviously what we're seeing in Romania is a massive protest vote. And I'm talking about a vote because essentially we are in this extended electoral period that started last year, and it's continuing, as I said, until at least the month of May. And so obviously whoever wants to score points at this point, campaigning on an anti-establishment platform, will try to attack every pillar of the establishment there can be. And the president, to be honest, was a very unpopular figure anyway. He was one of the sources of public discontent. He has all-time low approval rates, a complete lack of popularity, and it is to a large extent his inactivity that brought us to the situation that we are in. However, I think it is more worrying, not that the opposition was able to try to initiate the procedure and try to collect the votes. What's worrying is that the ruling coalition, the parliamentary majority, essentially considered that they were not able to put up a united front. So the basic reason for which the president decided to resign, after saying just last week in Brussels, I think, that he was not planning on going, was that his own supporters were unable to guarantee that they would be able to lend that support after all. So what we're seeing is a very fragmented, very fragile parliamentary majority and ruling coalition.
So the president also said that he wanted to avoid a toxic atmosphere surrounding Romania in the next couple of weeks. He didn't want this to be the main subject of debate, as a result of which the reputation of the country would suffer. Do you think that he is going to achieve this objective now that the question of him remaining or leaving is essentially no longer going to be newsworthy? In a couple of days, this will just be a fact. He resigned, and that's that.
I think the damage has been done already, and we're seeing that already in the reaction from foreign investors, from external partners. I myself have been getting countless calls from both the say economic side of things and our political partners abroad, asking what was going on, and the only thing that's being seen abroad is complete chaos. There's not a lot of room for nuance at this point. I think the perception could very well be that there's a general collapse of state order. I wouldn't go so far. Again, in terms of executive power, things are going pretty much according to the constitution and existing laws and regulations in place. But on a political level, however, we are seeing this extreme fragmentation with or without President Iohannis. Anyway, I think, essentially the major game was on between pro-democratic forces trying to keep it together, to keep the country on a steady direction and to preserve its strategic orientation, and the challengers, the radical forces, the extremists, the anti-establishment populist forces. And over the past few weeks, it seemed like there was a significant level of consensus from the pro-democratic forces, from the institutional establishment, the political class, coming together around the shared goal of stopping the country from turning away from its pro-Western, pro-democratic path. I don't think we can say that with any level of certainty at this point. I think there are very few political leaders or executive leadership at this point in Romania that is able to keep the country on a steady course. So I think, unfortunately, the competition between these democratic forces and the so-called restoration of anti-democratic order that we're seeing, the competition is on again.
So what is the worst case scenario? Is it likely that we're going to see an anti-NATO, pro-Russian president once the elections are done, once the votes are counted? Do you think that this is a realistic prospect at this stage?
I would say it is not an implausible scenario. I would still say that it's not the likeliest scenario, but I would say that it's entirely possible. The sovereigntist forces are very likely to see President Iohannis stepping down as a partial victory. The Alliance for the Unity of Romanians, the Radical Party, have already announced that they were going for the government and the prime minister next. They're going to go for a no confidence vote. So they're trying to take down the government as well. I think this emboldens those who are trying to go after every part of the so-called system. And when we talk about the system, obviously the public anger is directed against the political class, but it has also come to be directed against democratic order. So this is likely to be seen as hope-giving for the anti-establishment forces. So they're just going to continue the protests. They're going to continue campaigning. It is not unlikely that Mr. Georgescu, who is pro-Russian and anti-Western and nationalist and far-right, is going to run again in the next elections. There is no guarantee that his candidacy will be invalidated, despite the fact that he was essentially the cause for the annulment of elections in the first place. And if he runs, he has good chances of winning. So I think at this point, all bets are off. It is very hard to make a clear-cut prediction.
And with what degree of confidence can we say that this has been a Kremlin operation all along? I mean, if someone believes in coincidences, they might say, oh, well, here comes a guy previously completely unknown. He just happens to say that Romania should rely on Russian wisdom instead of its alliance with the West. He also just happens to believe that Ukraine is an artificial state. So essentially, all the Kremlin talking points seem to be there. But some people will say, no, I mean, there was nothing wrong with the elections. Why did you cancel him? Why did you want to cancel him? What do you think are the chances that essentially we're going to find out that well, this was indeed something that was orchestrated artificially from the outside. Do we have enough evidence at this stage?
We don't have enough evidence, and that is a problem in itself. If the state institutions, the responsible agencies, and the fiscal authority is conducting an investigation. I think the anti-organized crime directorate is conducting an investigation. If they're not going to produce solid evidence of whatever wrongdoing has been there that led to the annulment of elections, that is just going to increase public anger, and it's going to increase the general feeling that the annulment itself was anti-democratic even more than whatever may have happened that would have led to a rigged election result. But that aside, I would say this was not a Kremlin operation from the very beginning, and this is not a Kremlin operation. This is homegrown. The only issue here is that pro-Russian networks have always existed in Romania after 1989. Romania didn't have an organized collective opposition to the communist regime of the type that you had in Poland. So obviously, after the regime change, there was a lot of continuity at the level of the state apparatus, and a lot of the people with strong connections to Moscow were still there, and they were marginalized for a good while because of Romania's very firm pro-European and pro-Euro-Atlantic option. And so they were also marginalized within political parties, within state institutions, although everybody knew of their existence. But once the pressure was off, once we even had the CVM, the Cooperation and Verification Mechanism for Justice and Rule of Law, lifted, once the EU got busy with a lot of other things, and Washington as well, I believe that there was a belief within these groups of interest whose goal is, just like in Viktor Orban's Hungary, to make sure that they have as much unchecked control over institutions as possible and as many privileges as possible. They probably perceived this as a potential tipping point, and which could lead to a reversal of Romania's Euro-Atlantic course. And this was done, of course, in cooperation with Russian-aligned networks, leading up to the Kremlin at the end of the rope, let's say. But this was not somebody in the Kremlin orchestrating the whole process. This was rather an organic, very symbiotic ecosystem that was developed over the decades, which is in permanent communication, and not just between Russia and Romania, but across the region. Usually, Romanian politicians with pro-Russian connections go through businesses and politicians in third countries, whether Ukraine, Moldova, Bulgaria, Serbia, Hungary, any other country with less transparency, accountability. So these are complex regional networks that, again, are in symbiotic relationship. And so all that Russia had to do was just pump in some more money through pre-existing channels and add in some social media strategists who would know how to manipulate TikTok algorithms. It didn't have to create the whole operation from scratch. It just had to use both useful idiots domestically and actual like-minded agents of influence.
Oana Popescu was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you.
And I'm Jonasz Rewiński. You're watching TVP World. Please stay with us for more latest news and features.